So, as Graham says, I'm going to take you through the options we developed for the areas in Laxey. So I'll start off with Laxey Harbour, and the initial starting point to any good design should be to thoroughly understand the baseline conditions that are occurring in Laxey. So we set about estimating what the current standard of protection was within Laxey Harbour. It was at risk of still water level flooding, so when the actual static water levels are in excess of the defence levels, during the 1 in 100 year storm, which equates to a 1% chance of being flooded annually. Now we think this is probably an overestimation of the standard of protection, because we've heard of this evidence of waves propagating through into the harbour and overtopping the defences within the harbour environment. So while it claims to be a 1 in 100 standard of protection, we believe it is quite considerably lower than that. So then we took the existing defences into the future scenario and looked at what standard protection that offered. And that standard protection then reduced to a 1 in 1 year standard of protection in 100 years' time, equating to a 100% chance of being flooded on an annual basis. So there's clearly a need to design something to offer a flood reduction now and both in the future. At the first instance, we considered a whole suite of options for Laxey Harbour, but these were quickly rejected due to the confined nature of Laxey Harbour. There's not a lot of room there to fit in a lot of defence types. So the other options we considered was to place a setback wall within the harbour to allow portions of the areas to flood, and those areas would be non-critical infrastructure and areas where the houses weren't. But with the confined nature of Laxey Harbour, we decided that there isn't actually a lot of area we can allow to flood, and so we've stuck to the raised harbour wall option, which raises the defence on the existing line of the harbour at the moment. So if we look at this in cross-section, we can see that there's two wall types within Laxey. We've got the initial large walls on the fronting Tent Road, and then we've also got this stone steps with a small little concrete cap behind. So we've designed two different wall types for the two different defence types as existing. The first is this large cantilever wall on fronting Tent Road, and the second is a concrete cap which sits on the existing concrete cap that's there. We achieved the 1 in 200 year standard of protection, and we also allowed an additional increase in the defence height to allow for some of this wave action that's propagating through the harbour. So during subsequent design stages, there may be opportunities that we can find to reduce the height that we've initially proposed here, but that would be detailed at a later date. The cost comes in at around 0.9 million, which offers a reasonable performance given the standard of protection currently offered. However, Laxey is a very picturesque and sleepy harbour fishing village, so we appreciate that the impact of a large concrete wall within the harbour could considerably damage the landscape and visual aspect. So there is a need to make this defence soft and to try and blend it in with the environment to try and limit the impact as much as possible. If we look in Planform, we can see that the red line is indicating this raised harbour wall on the existing line of defence there, and the blue line indicates the raised small concrete cap on the stone steps. So it's planning to front Tent Road and then wrap around up the riverbank to prevent flooding at any of the low points along those defences. So as I mentioned, there is a need to design this defence to be in keeping with the surroundings. So I've just provided a couple of slides here of ways that you can soften the defence, and that could be through wall cladding, so you could artificially put stone in front of the wall. You could have slate as well, and that's been incorporated in previous jobs. There's opportunities to landscape the harbour environment to provide seating, to provide plant boxes and trees, and there's all sorts of crafty ways of making a flood defence look less severe. So now I'll move on to Laxey Open Coast. This frontage now is not at risk of still water level flooding, but it is at risk of wave overtopping. We see that the defences are being overtopped on this, on the southern area of Laxey, and that water's washing into the harbour and contributing to some of the the chop around in the harbour. It's currently at risk of wave overtopping in the 1 in 50 year storm, which equates to a 2% chance of being flooded annually. As we move into the future scenario, that standard of protection decreases rapidly until it's offering a 1 in 5 year standard of protection in 100 years' time. That's equating to a 20% chance of being flooded annually. So the increase in flood risk is quite dramatic here. So again, there's clearly a need to design something to offer a flood reduction now and in the future. Here we offered 3 options to reduce the flood risk: a setback seawall, a raised seawall, and a rock revetment. So I'll take them through individually now. So the first option is to place a seawall behind the existing seawall, and this is working on the principle that waves are allowed to overtop the initial defence, but we can sacrificially allow some areas to get wet during a storm event. So it acts as a kind of a wave capture tank for any of the volume of water overtopping the defences. It's offering a 1 in 100 standard of protection, which is not quite what we were aiming for in our initial proposal, which equates to a 1% chance of being flooded annually. The reasons for this is to offer the 1 in 200 year standard of protection in 100 years, the defence would have to be about 1.6 metres off the ground. And that would be a considerable wall, which would have a considerable impact within Laxey. So we've taken an approach at this early stage to say, let's limit the height of the wall to 1.2 metres, which should hopefully impact have less impact on the surroundings within Laxey. It comes in at a cost of £0.8 million. But again, there is the same impact with the raised harbour wall in the harbour environment, in that it is a concrete wall, and it may be quite imposing in the environment. The second option is to raise the existing seawall by placing a small concrete cap on top of the wall. This didn't really reach anywhere near our intended design standards and only offered a 1 in 10 year standard of protection, equating to a 10% chance of being flooded annually. So it offers little extra performance in terms of the initial baseline scenarios. It comes in at a cheap price, but as it's not really achieving the defence design criteria we were intending for, we can largely discount this from our options appraisal. The third and final option is a rock revetment. This option works to dissipate wave energy arriving at the coastline on the rock to break up the wave energy, preventing it hitting the seawall. It would be placed in front of the seawall and would achieve the 1 in 200 year design standard that we intended. It comes in at a marginally higher capital cost at 1.5 million, but has the added benefit of adding some protection to the existing seawall, which is currently showing signs of some disrepair at the moment. And in the future, that disrepair is likely to increase. However, while it comes in at a reasonable economic cost, arguably the bigger cost is to the environment and landscape within Laxey. So it will be a considerable land take on the existing beach, and may take up some of that beach, which is quite a nice feature within Laxey already. So looking at these in Planform, the green line is very faint on here, so you may not be able to see it, but it shows the outward extent of the rock revetment option. So you can see that land take I was talking about earlier. The red option is the raised seawall. As we've discussed, that doesn't offer the design standard required. And the blue option is the setback wall, with intermittent gaps in to allow members of the public to freely move between areas during normal conditions, but floodboards would be inserted during storm conditions to prevent water outflanking the defences. So from a purely technical standpoint, and this is where we're really looking for your input, we consider the setback wall option to be the best solution within Laxey Open Coast. That's because it offers a good standard of protection and has the least impact in terms of surroundings and landscape. The second option, best option, is the rock revetments. From a pure design capabilities, it is the best option, but we are worried about the impact within Laxey. And the option that can be largely discounted is the raised seawall because of the lack of conformation with the design standards.